The clock above the nurse's station read 2:47 a.m. Sarah Thompson adjusted her scrubs, trying to shake off the creeping sense of unease that had settled over her like a second skin. The hospital corridors were eerily quiet tonight, too quiet for comfort. Her footsteps echoed as she walked down the dimly lit hallway, clipboard in hand, checking on patients who were either asleep or pretending to be. She paused outside room 303. Something about this room always gave her chills. Maybe it was the way the light bulb above the door flickered constantly, casting strange shadows along the walls. Or maybe it was just her imagination running wild after pulling too many consecutive night shifts. Either way, Sarah avoided this room whenever possible, but duty called, and so did protocol. She knocked softly before pushing the door open. "Hello?" "Checking vitals," she murmured, more out of habit than expectation. The room was empty, just as it should have been. Yet, something felt wrong. A faint whisper drifted through the air. At first, Sarah thought it was her mind playing tricks. Again. Nurses often joked about how silence could make you hear things like your own heartbeat pounding in your ears. But then the whispers grew louder, clearer. They weren't coming from inside her head. They were coming from somewhere within the room itself. Sarah froze. Her grip tightened around the clipboard until her knuckles turned white. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound calm. There was no response, only those soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to slither across the floorboards and wrap themselves around her ankles. And then, without warning, cold breath brushed against the back of her neck. Her body jolted forward, heart hammering wildly. She spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind her. But the doorway remained empty. No one was there. Sarah staggered back into the room, clutching the edge of the bedside table for support. Her rational mind screamed at her to leave too. Get out while she still could, but her legs refused to obey. Instead, she stood rooted to the spot, scanning every corner of the room with wide, terrified eyes. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. And yet, the feeling of being watched was suffocating. She forced herself to take slow, deliberate breaths. "It's just stress," she told herself firmly. "You've been working too hard lately. You need sleep." Still, logic couldn't explain the icy chill clinging to her skin or the faint scent of antiseptic mixed with something metallic, something like blood that lingered in the air. Against her better judgment, Sarah decided to investigate further. If there really was something or someone in this room, she needed to know what it was. Forcing her shaking hands to steady, she opened the closet door near the window. Empty. Next, she checked beneath the bed. Also empty. Relief began to creep in, fragile but welcome. Perhaps she'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe exhaustion had finally caught up with her. With a shaky laugh, she muttered, "I'm losing it." But as she turned to leave, her gaze landed on the far wall, and her blood ran cold. There, pinned to the peeling wallpaper with a rusted nail, was a photograph. A black and white image of a young woman wearing a nurse's uniform identical to hers. The face staring back at her wasn't unfamiliar, it was her own. Except it couldn't be. The photo looked decades old, faded and cracked with age. Sarah hadn't even been born when this picture must have been taken. Her stomach churned. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed, gripping the photograph tightly between trembling fingers. Her mind raced, searching for any explanation that didn't involve ghosts or time travel or whatever madness this might be. Was this some kind of prank? Had one of her co-workers planted the photo here as a joke? But why would anyone go to such lengths? As questions swirled in her head, memories surfaced, unbidden memories she'd tried so desperately to bury. Memories of another night shift, 3 weeks ago, when everything had gone horribly wrong. It had been chaotic that night. A car accident brought in multiple casualties, and Sarah had been overwhelmed. One patient, a young girl named Lily, had slipped into cardiac arrest under her care. Despite her frantic attempts to revive her, Lily died. And though the doctors assured her it wasn't her fault, Sarah couldn't shake the guilt. She replayed the scene over and over in her mind, wondering if she could have done something differently, wondering if she'd failed. Had she somehow brought this curse upon herself? Was this haunting punishment for letting Lily die? Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away furiously, angry at herself for being weak, angry at the world for forcing her to relive this pain. But most of all, angry at whatever force had placed her in this impossible situation. Just as Sarah resolved to leave the room and never look back, the whispers returned. Louder this time, clearer. They formed words now, disjointed phrases that sent shivers down her spine. Lily, remember Lily. Her breath hitched. How did it know her name? Before she could process the implications, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost crept along the edges of the windows, spreading like spider webs across the glass. The lights overhead flickered violently, plunging the space into near darkness. Only the glow of the moonlight streaming through the blinds illuminated the room and the figure now standing in the doorway. It was Lily, or at least, it looked like Lily. Her pale face hovered inches above the ground, her eyes hollow and lifeless. Blood seeped from the bandage wrapped around her chest, staining the front of her hospital gown. She raised a finger, pointing directly at Sarah. "You let me die," she whispered, her voice a guttural rasp that barely sounded human. Sarah stumbled backward, tripping over the bed frame and landing hard on the floor. Her scream caught in her throat, choking her. She scrambled to her feet, ready to bolt, but the door slammed shut before she could reach it. Pounding fists echoed from the other side. Someone or something was trying to break through. With nowhere else to go, Sarah pressed her back against the wall, clutching the photograph tightly to her chest. Her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something. But fear paralyzed her, rooting her to the spot. The pounding grew louder, more insistent. Then, a familiar voice called out from beyond the door. "Sarah, open the door." It was Dr. Patel, one of the senior physicians on staff. Relief flooded her veins, followed immediately by doubt. Could she trust him? What if he wasn't alone? What if he was part of whatever nightmare had trapped her in this room? Summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, Sarah approached the door. Her hand hovered over the handle, hesitating. Just as she prepared to turn it, the whispers returned, louder than ever. "Don't trust him." Her heart skipped a beat. Through the frosted glass of the door, she saw a shadow move, not Dr. Patel's, but something else. Something darker. Something unnatural. And then, the handle began to turn on its own. Marcus Reed adjusted the strap of his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness of the deserted office building. As a security guard working the graveyard shift, he was used to solitude, but tonight felt different. The air was heavier, charged with an unshakable tension that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He paused outside the third-floor conference room, where faint voices drifted from behind the closed door. Strange, the building should have been empty hours ago. Marcus hesitated, then pressed his ear closer to the door. The murmurs were indistinct, almost like static, but one phrase stood out clearly: "Don't trust anyone wearing blue." His hand instinctively went to his uniform shirt. Blue. He wore it every night. Every damn night. A chill crept up his spine as he stepped back, his boots scuffing against the polished floor. Whatever or whoever was inside that room knew something about him, and that knowledge terrified him more than the silence ever could. Marcus decided to investigate further, though every fiber of his being screamed at him to walk away. He pushed open the door cautiously, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the room was empty save for overturned chairs and scattered papers littering the floor. A single fluorescent light flickered above the long mahogany table, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Something wasn't right. He scanned the room, his flashlight beam dancing over the chaos. His gaze landed on a crumpled piece of paper, lying near the center of the table. Curiosity got the better of him, and he picked it up, smoothing it out carefully. It was a photograph, a grainy image of two people standing close together, their faces barely visible in the dim lighting. One of them was unmistakably Marcus, but the other... It took him a moment to recognize her. When he did, his stomach dropped. It was his wife, Rachel, but that wasn't possible. The photo had been taken years ago, long before they'd even met. Long before she'd moved to town, started working at the local cafe, or walked into his life with her warm smile and easy laugh. Yet there she was, standing beside him as if they'd known each other forever. Marcus's hands trembled as he turned the photo over. On the back, written in faded ink, were 3 words: "She lied to you." The discovery hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. For weeks now, he'd suspected something was off with Rachel. Little things, missed calls, late-night texts she refused to explain, hurried excuses whenever he asked about her day. At first, he brushed it off as paranoia, blaming the stress of their jobs and the strain of marriage. But this was undeniable proof that something was very, very wrong. Memories flooded back, sharp and painful. Last month, he'd found an unfamiliar receipt tucked into her purse, a hotel bill dated the same night she claimed to be visiting her sister. She'd laughed it off when he confronted her, saying it must have been a mistake. He'd wanted to believe her. God, how he'd wanted to believe her. Now, staring at the photo in his trembling hands, Marcus realized just how much he'd let himself be blinded by love, or maybe by fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of being alone again. "What are you hiding?" he whispered aloud, his voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. As if in response, the lights in the conference room flickered violently, plunging the space into darkness. Marcus fumbled for his flashlight, but the batteries died instantly. Panic surged through him as he stumbled toward the exit, guided only by the faint glow of emergency lights lining the hallway. And that's when he saw her. Rachel stood at the far end of the corridor, her silhouette framed by the pale moonlight, streaming through the windows. Relief washed over Marcus momentarily, until he noticed something odd. Her movements were stiff, unnatural, as though she were sleepwalking. Worse still, her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, reflecting no emotion whatsoever. "Rachel?" he called, his voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" She didn't answer. Instead, she began walking toward him, her pace slow but deliberate. Each step echoed ominously in the silent hallway, sending fresh waves of dread coursing through Marcus's veins. "Rachel, stop!" he shouted, backing away instinctively. "This isn't funny." Still, she advanced, her glowing eyes fixed on him like a predator stalking its prey. Finally, she stopped just a few feet away, tilting her head slightly as if studying him. Then, in a voice that wasn't quite hers, she said, "You should have listened to the message." Before Marcus could react, she vanished, simply disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender perfume. Marcus staggered backward, his mind reeling. None of this made sense. How had Rachel gotten into the building? Why had she acted so strangely? And what did she mean by the message? Then it hit him. The radio transmission he'd received earlier, the cryptic warning about not trusting anyone wearing blue. Could it have been referring to Rachel? To him? As these thoughts raced through his mind, a low growl reverberated through the hallway. Marcus spun around, his flashlight miraculously flickering back to life. Its beam illuminated a figure standing in the shadows at the opposite end of the corridor. It was another security guard, one Marcus recognized immediately. His co-worker, James, except something was wrong. James's uniform was drenched in blood, dripping steadily onto the floor. His face was twisted into a grotesque grin, and his eyes glinted with malice. Well, James drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. Looks like someone's been snooping where they shouldn't. Marcus backed away, his heart pounding wildly. What's going on? What do you want? James chuckled darkly, taking a step forward. Oh, I think you already know. With that, he lunged and Marcus bolted down the hallway, knowing full well that escape might not be an option anymore. Priya Patel stared at her computer screen, the glowing monitor casting an eerie blue light across her face. Another late-night call center shift stretched endlessly before her, interrupted only by the occasional beep of an incoming call. She sighed, rubbing her temples as she prepared herself for yet another mundane conversation about internet bills or misplaced packages. But this time, when the phone rang, something felt off. She hesitated before picking up, the shrill sound piercing through the otherwise silent office. Finally, she answered with practiced professionalism. Thank you for calling Global Support Services. How may I assist you today? There was no immediate response, only the faint sound of breathing on the other end. Priya frowned, leaning closer to the headset. Hello. Are you there? A voice finally spoke, low and distorted, like it was being filtered through static. Do you remember what happened to Maya? Priya froze, her blood turning to ice. Maya, the name sent a jolt of recognition and dread through her body. It had been years since anyone had mentioned that name aloud. Years since she'd allowed herself to think about her childhood best friend whose memory she'd buried deep beneath layers of guilt and regret. What did you say? Priya whispered, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. The caller didn't respond directly. Instead, they continued in that same haunting tone. You know what you did. You can't run from it forever. And then, just as suddenly as the call had begun, the line went dead. Priya sat stunned, staring at the receiver in her hand. Her mind raced, replaying fragments of memories she'd spent years trying to forget. Memories of Maya, their laughter-filled summers, their whispered secrets, and the bitter arguments that eventually drove them apart. The last argument had been the worst. They were 16, standing in Priya's bedroom amidst scattered textbooks and crumpled notes. Maya accused Priya of stealing her boyfriend, though nothing could have been further from the truth. Hurt turned to anger, words became weapons, and by the end of it, both girls stormed away, vowing never to speak again. 2 weeks later, Maya disappeared without a trace. No one ever found out what happened to her. Some believed she ran away. Others whispered about foul play. But Priya knew better than anyone how fragile their friendship had become, and how much blame she bore for its collapse. Shaking off the suffocating weight of those thoughts, Priya forced herself to focus. Maybe this was just some prank caller messing with her head, or maybe not. Her gaze drifted to the stack of files beside her desk. One folder caught her eye, a thick manila envelope marked Employee Records. Curiosity overtook caution, and she pulled it toward her, flipping it open. Inside were photocopies of old documents, newspaper clippings, and photographs. One photo stopped her cold. It showed a group of teenagers gathered around a bonfire, their faces illuminated by flickering flames. Among them were Priya and Maya, smiling side by side as if nothing bad could ever come between them. But what made Priya's stomach churn was the figure standing slightly apart from the group, a tall, shadowy silhouette wearing a hoodie. The caption beneath the image read, "Local teenagers reported missing after late-night gathering turns deadly." Priya's hands trembled as she studied the photograph. That night it had all started with that stupid bonfire party. Maya had begged her to go, saying it would help mend their fractured relationship. Reluctantly, Priya agreed, hoping to ease the tension between them. But things quickly spiraled out of control. Someone brought alcohol. Someone else suggested playing truth or dare games that went too far. By midnight, tempers flared, accusations flew, and Maya stormed off into the woods alone, No one followed her. Not even Priya. She remembered sitting by the fire afterward, listening to the others laugh and joke as if nothing was wrong. When dawn broke and Maya still hadn't returned, panic set in, but by then, it was too late. Guilt slammed into Priya like a freight train. She'd failed Maya not just that night, but every day since. Failed to protect her. Failed to find her. Failed to keep her promise that they'd always be friends. Tears blurred her vision as she closed the folder, unable to look at the photo any longer. For years, she'd told herself that moving on was the only way to survive. That burying the past was the only way to heal. But now, faced with undeniable evidence of its persistence, she realized how wrong she'd been. Whatever was happening tonight wasn't random. It was personal. And it wanted answers. Before Priya could process everything, the phone rang again. Startled, she grabbed the receiver, half expecting to hear the same distorted voice from earlier. Instead, a familiar male voice greeted her, one she hadn't heard in years. "Priya, is that you?" Her breath hitched. "Ravi? What are you doing calling me?" Ravi Kumar had been Maya's older brother and once upon a time, Priya's closest confidant. After Maya's disappearance, their friendship dissolved along with everything else. Hearing his voice now felt surreal, almost dreamlike. "I need your help," Ravi said urgently. "I've been looking into what happened to Maya, and I think I'm getting close to finding something big, something dangerous." Priya's heart pounded. "What do you mean? What did you find?" There was a pause on the other end. Then Ravi whispered, "I think someone covered it up. Someone we trusted." Before she could press him for details, the line crackled ominously. A new voice cut in, cold and menacing. "You shouldn't have dug so deep." The call disconnected abruptly, leaving Priya staring at the phone in horror. Who had intervened? And why? Moments later, her computer screen flickered violently, displaying a single line of text in bold red letters. "She's watching you." Panic surged through Priya as she frantically unplugged her computer, disconnecting it from the network. But the damage was already done. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally across the walls, pooling around her desk like liquid darkness. From somewhere nearby, she heard faint footsteps, slow, deliberate, and growing louder. She grabbed the employee records folder and bolted toward the exit, her mind screaming at her to escape. As she reached the door, she glanced back and froze. Standing in the middle of the room was a figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured but unmistakably feminine. Its eyes glowed faintly, piercing through the gloom like twin embers. "Maya?" Priya gasped, her voice barely audible. The figure raised a hand, pointing directly at her. Then, in a voice that chilled her to the bone, it whispered, "You left me." Before Priya could react, the lights went out completely, plunging the office into total darkness. The last thing she heard before everything went silent was the sound of her own scream echoing through the empty halls. Sarah stumbled through the hospital corridors, her legs weak but her resolve unyielding. She clutched the photograph of herself from room 303 tightly in her hand, its edges digging into her palm as if anchoring her to reality or perhaps dragging her further into madness. Every step felt heavier than the last, each shadow stretching unnaturally long as though mocking her fear. But she wasn't alone anymore. Behind her, Lily's phantom trailed silently, her hollow eyes locked onto Sarah like a predator stalking prey. The whispers that had haunted Sarah earlier now coalesced into a single chilling refrain. "You can't hide." Sarah reached the hospital basement door, fumbling with the rusted handle until it finally gave way. Inside, the air was damp and cold, carrying the faint metallic tang of blood. Flickering fluorescent lights cast an uneven glow over rows of dusty shelves stacked high with forgotten medical supplies. But what caught Sarah's attention was something else entirely. A figure hunched over a table at the far end of the room. It was Marcus. Marcus looked up as Sarah entered, his face pale and streaked with sweat. His uniform shirt was torn, revealing angry red scratches across his chest. He held a flashlight in one hand and a crumpled photograph in the other, the same photo of him and Rachel that had shaken him to his core. "What are you doing here?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling between fear and desperation. "I could ask you the same thing," Marcus replied hoarsely. His gaze shifted past her, landing on the ghostly figure of Lily hovering just outside the doorway. Is that who I think it is?" Before Sarah could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Looks like we're all connected after all." They turned to see Priya emerge from behind a stack of crates, clutching the employee records folder against her chest. Her wide, tear-filled eyes darted between them, searching for answers neither seemed ready to provide. "This isn't possible," Sarah said, shaking her head. "How do you two fit into this?" Priya hesitated before speaking. "I don't know everything yet, but I found these files. They tie us together somehow, our pasts, our secrets." Her voice broke as she added, "And they're tied to Maya too." At the mention of the name, Marcus stiffened. "Maya? As in the missing girl?" Priya nodded grimly. "She went missing after a party none of us wanted to talk about again. And now," she swallowed hard, gesturing toward the folders, "now it feels like whatever happened back then is coming back to haunt us." As the trio exchanged stories, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place, but not without resistance. Each revelation came at a cost, forcing them to confront truths they'd buried long ago. Sarah admitted to letting Lily die under her care, confessing how guilt had consumed her ever since. Marcus revealed his crumbling marriage and the disturbing realization that Rachel might be involved in something sinister. And Priya confessed her role in Maya's disappearance, recounting the argument that drove her friend away and ultimately led to her vanishing. Through their shared pain, they uncovered fragments of a larger conspiracy. The photographs tying them together weren't random. They were clues left by someone or something, intent on exposing their deepest regrets. Someone who knew exactly where to strike. Then Marcus noticed something odd about the photographs. "These aren't normal pictures," he muttered, holding them up to the light. "Look at the dates. They're impossible." He was right. The images depicted moments that hadn't occurred yet or shouldn't have. In Sarah's photo, she appeared decades older, standing beside a gravestone engraved with Lily's name. In Marcus's, Rachel wore a security badge identical to his own, despite never working in law enforcement. And in Priya's, Maya stood, smiling alongside Ravi, but with glowing eyes similar to those haunting their visions. "It's like whoever made these knows the future," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. The weight of their confessions pressed down on them, forcing raw emotions to surface. Tears streamed down Priya's face as she apologized to Sarah for doubling her workload during shifts, suspecting her negligence contributed to Lily's death. Marcus admitted feeling betrayed by both Rachel and himself, acknowledging how blind trust had blinded him to warning signs. And Sarah, for the first time, allowed herself to grieve openly, not just for Lily, but for the person she used to be before guilt tore her apart. For a brief moment, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by fragile solidarity. They realized they weren't just victims of some malevolent force. They were survivors clinging to hope amidst chaos. But the respite didn't last long. A low rumble echoed through the basement, shaking the floor beneath their feet. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the lights above flickered wildly. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, an elderly man dressed in tattered robes, his face obscured by a hood. In his hands, he carried an ornate box etched with strange symbols. "You've done well to come this far," he rasped, his voice echoing unnaturally. "But your journey is far from over. Who are you?" Marcus demanded, stepping protectively in front of the others. The man chuckled darkly. "I am merely a messenger. This artifact," he gestured to the box, "contains the essence of your collective guilt. It feeds on regret, betrayal, and unresolved trauma. And it will not rest until every secret has been laid bare. With that, he opened the box. A blinding light erupted, engulfing the room and pulling them into a nightmarish dreamscape. When the light faded, they found themselves standing in unfamiliar surroundings, a desolate wasteland littered with broken mirrors reflecting distorted versions of themselves. From the horizon, a massive shadow loomed, taking shape slowly. It was a monstrous amalgamation of their worst fears. Lily's lifeless body, Rachel's glowing eyes, Maya's accusing stare, all fused into one grotesque entity. Its voice boomed, reverberating through the void. Face what you've hidden, or become it. As the creature advanced, the ground beneath them cracked open, threatening to swallow them whole. Desperation drove them to flee, but no matter which direction they ran, the mirrors reflected only one horrifying truth. Their reflections were beginning to change, morphing into twisted versions of themselves. The nightmare world was relentless, a labyrinth of broken mirrors reflecting the darkest corners of their souls. Sarah, Marcus, and Priya ran breathlessly through the desolate wasteland, their footsteps crunching against shards of glass that littered the ground. The monstrous entity loomed closer, its grotesque form shifting and writhing like smoke given life. Its voice echoed around them, a cacophony of whispers that drilled into their minds. Face your truths, or be consumed by them. They stopped abruptly as the ground beneath them cracked open once more, forcing them to huddle together in a shrinking patch of stable terrain. Fear gripped them, but exhaustion had begun to give way to something else: resignation. They couldn't keep running forever. It was time to face what they'd been avoiding all along. We can't fight this thing, Sarah said, her voice trembling yet resolute. It's not out there, it's inside us, Marcus nodded grimly. She's right, whatever this creature is, it's feeding on our guilt, our regrets. Until we deal with that, we're stuck here. Priya clutched the employee records folder tightly, her knuckles white. Then let's finish this, together. One by one, they turned inward, confronting the ghosts of their pasts. Sarah stepped forward first, facing her reflection in a nearby mirror. Instead of seeing her own face, she saw Lily, the young girl whose death she'd failed to prevent. Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks as she whispered, "I'm so sorry, Lily. I should have saved you." Lily's image softened, her hollow eyes filling with warmth. "You did everything you could," she replied gently. "But holding on to guilt won't bring me back. Let go, Sarah. Forgive yourself." With those words, Lily's reflection faded, leaving behind only Sarah's own tear-streaked face. She exhaled shakily, feeling a weight lift from her chest for the first time in years. Next was Marcus. His reflection showed Rachel, her glowing eyes piercing through the glass. "Why didn't you trust me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "How could you lie to me?" Rachel's expression softened, though sadness lingered in her gaze. "I never meant to hurt you, Marcus. But lies breed lies. And when you live a lie, even love becomes poisoned. Trust isn't about perfection, it's about honesty. Start there." Her image dissolved, leaving Marcus staring at his own reflection. He wiped away a tear, vowing silently to rebuild what he'd lost, or at least find peace within himself. Finally, it was Priya's turn. Her reflection revealed Maya, standing beside Ravi. Both wore expressions of quiet sorrow. "Why did you leave me?" Priya choked out, her voice barely audible. "Why didn't you come back?" Maya shook her head sadly. "I didn't leave because of you, Priya. I left because I was scared of myself, of my choices. None of this was your fault. You carried the blame long enough. Let it go." As Maya and Ravi faded, Priya collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. But amidst the grief, she felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she could forgive herself. With their personal demons confronted, the trio regrouped, their resolve stronger than ever. The monstrous entity still loomed over them, but its movements were slower now, less menacing. It seemed to falter as if weakened by their newfound clarity. "What is this thing?" Priya asked, her voice steadier than before. "Why does it look like pieces?" Sarah studied the creature intently. "It's not just us. It's everyone who's ever kept secrets, buried guilt, or refused to face the truth. It thrives on unresolved pain, but it can't survive without fuel." Realization dawned on Marcus. "That's why it brought us here, to force us to confront our pasts. If we stop feeding it, it'll disappear." "But how do we do that?" Priya asked. Sarah took a deep breath. "We destroy the artifact. Without it, this place collapses. We break free, or we stay trapped here forever," Marcus finished grimly. Without hesitation, they moved toward the ornate box that had summoned them into this nightmare. The ground quaked violently beneath their feet, and the creature roared in protest, lunging toward them with renewed ferocity. But they pressed on, driven by desperation and determination. Reaching the box, they found it pulsating with dark energy, tendrils of shadow snaking outward like grasping hands. Sarah reached for it first, but the moment her fingers brushed its surface, searing pain shot through her arm. She cried out, stumbling backward. "It burns," she gasped. "It's protecting itself." Marcus stepped forward next, gripping the edge of the box firmly. "We have to work together, all of us." Priya joined him, placing her hands alongside his. Together, they channeled every ounce of strength and courage they had left. The box resisted fiercely, sending waves of agony coursing through their bodies. But slowly, inexorably, the lid began to pry open. Inside lay a swirling void of darkness, the source of the entity's power. As they stared into it, memories flooded their minds. Moments of joy, sorrow, betrayal, and redemption. Each memory was a thread binding them to the living world and to each other. With a final, collective effort, they tipped the box upside down, spilling its contents into the abyss below. A deafening roar filled the air as the creature disintegrated into nothingness, its shadowy form unraveling like smoke caught in a breeze. The nightmare world shattered around them, dissolving into blinding light. When Sarah, Marcus, and Priya opened their eyes again, they found themselves back in the hospital basement. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a warm, reassuring glow. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Sarah broke the silence. "Is it over?" Marcus nodded, exhaling deeply. "Yeah, I think it is." Priya hugged the folder to her chest, smiling faintly. "We made it, together." They exchanged glances, sharing a silent understanding. Though their scars would remain, both visible and invisible, they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever before. As dawn broke outside, Sarah stood alone in the hospital courtyard, watching the sun rise over the horizon. Her mind drifted to Lily, to the guilt she'd carried for so long, and to the forgiveness she'd finally granted herself. A single thought lingered in her mind, crystallizing into a profound realization. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find who you really are. The end.